Namaste and welcome to the Bharatvaarta Weekly. This is the 98th edition of the Bharatvaarta Weekly. I have with me Abhishek Paul and Prasanna Vishwanathan. I'm Roshan Karyappa, and together we'll bring you some of the news and events of the week that was. Well, it's been a rather eventful week, one should say. There's the political drama that's unfolding in Maharashtra. We have a change in power there in the state. Then the Supreme Court had some interesting remarks on the Nupur Sharma case. The Indian rupee slid close to a lifetime low against the dollar. And then, of course, we have the very entertaining fifth test match between India and England at Edgbaston that is ongoing. All of this and more. Before we begin with the news for the week, let's talk about the episode that we put out last week. I think this was a very interesting episode, slightly different from the ones that normally you get to hear on Bharatvaarta on politics or policy or stuff like that. Dr. Bhushan Shukla, he was one of our early guests. He had done an episode with us in April of 2020, if I'm not mistaken, on parenting and child health and so on and so forth. In this discussion, we spoke about mental health and how the pandemic has kind of adversely impacted that. What you can do to have a better sort of a mental disposition and so on. Yeah, very nice conversation. One thing with the Dr. Bhushan is that he's able to really cut the clutter and and give it really straight. So yeah, I'd highly encourage everyone to check out this episode. Well, moving on to the first piece of news, the grisly Udaipur murder has some new developments. The National Investigation Agency has got a 10-day custody of the murder accused Mohammed Riaz and Ghaus Mohammed. For those out of the loop, the accused brutally murdered Kanaya Lal Theli, a tailor in Udaipur, Rajasthan. Riaz and Ghaus were arrested the same day they committed the crime. Two others who were accused in the case, Asif Hussain and Mohsen Khan, were arrested subsequently. Outside the court complex, police had a tough time dealing with lawyers and local residents who shouted slogans against the accused, including seeking their death sentence. Um, well, I mean, this is a case that continues to kind of shock the country. In fact, I mean, I have never seen something so brazen in a long, long time, right? Abhishek, what do you see happening further?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, this is a really shocking case, and it has sort of become the talking point around the country. Unfortunately, I can't really say I am surprised by what happened, right? The track record of people who take offense in cases where the prophet has been quote unquote insulted is a litany of similar cases around the world, right? Uh, so, for example, we had the infamous fatwa against Salman Rushdie, right, where you know top religious leaders from countries like Iran had given a fatwa, right? So while Salman Rushdie is alive and well, I understand about 60 people died over the years as part of that incident, right? Like publishers, translators, and things like that. Then you had the recent case in France, right? Multiple cases in recent years in France, from a school teacher to Charlie Hebdo, right? So, you know, this absolutely doesn't surprise me. The brazenness is probably of a different level in this case as far as India is concerned, right? So, in terms of the two people firstly making a video saying that they will commit the crime, then kind of recording it live, and then posting another video gloating about it, right, in the aftermath. Uh, and if you actually read more about the details of the case, and most of media has actually covered it fairly well. So I mean, it has been so brazen that they have not been able to hide it, right? Unlike another case in Maharashtra, which took 10 days to emerge, right, in the national media. But yeah, the case is something like There were complaints made against Kanhaiya Lal that he had shared something objectionable. Uh, so FIRs were raised. He was arrested for a day and then let off on bail. And then he sort of complained to the police that he was facing threats or he was feeling unsafe. The police, etc., said some words, but basically did not take it too seriously. And then this incident happened. If you actually read some of the reports, the poor man probably did not even do anything of the sort. His son shared something. He was not even like a social media savvy person, right? His son or someone else using his phone clicked a like or shared some post, and things escalated from there. So yeah, really, really sad case. These people were trying to flee this scene as well and go to their whatever native village or some other place, but at least the police nabbed them quick enough. There are other reports that there is some links to Pakistan and ISI and all that. I'm not really sure as to the veracity of all that or how much actual influence it had on the case. We'll have to wait for that, or maybe Prasanna, if you have any thoughts on this.
No, I think just as you pointed out, right? I think the beheading over blasphemy is not unprecedented. You had several
Yeah.
cases. I think what kind of shook the conscience of the nation was the brazenness involved in just not uploading the video with a triumphalist, brag after the act was perpetrated. I think there was actually a video which he posted before saying that he's going to do what he's going to do actually. So there are like two videos, and of course the police uh, failure, right? Like I mean, they quickly arrested him for probably sharing a social media post in support of Nupur. I mean, of course, he was bailed out the same day, but the reluctance to acknowledge his complaint that his life is under threat, right? Like they tried to kind of treat it like a very minor issue, and I mean, insensitively asked him to what do you call install a CCTV and all that. So the kind of keenness that the state system shows in policing speech or thoughts versus the lackadaisical attitude when it actually comes to ensuring protection to the life, that's quite that stark contrast can't be missed, right? Actually, it's quite a shameful thing, I would say. And you also pointed to the Amravati case. I think I think the way in which one thing that we have to really look at it is that I don't know whether social media role of social media is becoming like a double-edged sword, so as to speak. It definitely helps in highlighting and amplifying uh, cases like this, which would not have possibly reached everyone, right? Like, I mean, as both of us agree, blasphemy, beheading over blasphemy is not a. I mean, I would call it a feature of certain faiths. It's not like a exceptional occurrence. In fact, it's codified as law in many countries, right? Like, just that in India, there is still a blasphemy by other laws. Actually, I mean, there's no explicit what do you call outlawing of blasphemy, but it's practiced in so many other ways through a combination of law and through acts like this, right? Technically speaking. So I just speechless over the brazenness. But I think like if you really track social media, like in different languages, I hope that with the kind of intelligence apparatus finally recognizing that the digital world is a separate beast in itself. I think if they had definitely law policing just on ground, which is very important actually. I think like we've not even achieved that in the real world, policing robustness. But I think by the time the that is achieved, right, I think you would have already had this beast to handle, which would be far more difficult, right? Like, I mean, the kind of discourse, around blasphemy and the open death threads and all that. It's been there, like in so many regional. Some of the discourse, it tends to happen in, say, let's say it happens in Tamil Nadu or a state like Karnataka, might not even get highlighted because it's the entire discourse is conducted in a different language actually. And
Yeah.
so it's quite honestly quite frightening. We saw like the sloganeering that happened in Kerala, like young kids caught on camera, uh, issuing death threats to, I mean, the sheer dehumanization. And what really disturbs me is that you're okay killing a neighbor over, uh, you know, because he's allegedly insulted or probably said something which you think is adversarial about some person that you think is a prophet and who lived like centuries back. So this, I think, like, I don't know, maybe the way that we are wired to think about all these issues very fundamentally difficult. Maybe we should try to understand the other perspective, though it's very, very prima facie, at least it's very difficult to engage with that point of view and reconcile to that. But I don't know, seriously, how this can be handled, and I also see, I mean, I can understand the anger and the frustration of many Hindus, but from a practical, pragmatic options perspective, right? Ultimately, the state should have the capacity to deal it, and you're talking about, like, say, 200 million of them, right? And so, so I don't know. There can't be like one size fits all strategy, which probably an authoritarian state like China can do. And within the limits, and if we really you know I don't know, there's also a certain choice here, in the sense that, though I mean, the Chinese model, authoritarian model, where no freedom is there is a surveillance state, how they handle this, versus a democratic country where freedom of expression is at least constitutionally, it's kind of touted as a very important value. So between these two models, I think the later model is surely ill-equipped to handle this. But again, whether we are willing to sign up for a surveillance state type model is a moot point. I mean, I'm not personally a fan of that kind of model actually. So I don't know. It's very hard choices how we are going to manage this increasingly radicalized section. I think as much as it's the state's job to build the robust capability on all, I'm sure there are a lot of uh, uh, you know uh, um, there's a meaningful dialogue within the Muslim community. I'm sure there are significant sections which really don't like what is happening. I think, at least in modern society, all these concepts like blasphemy has no place. Actually, uh, I think I hope some healthy theological debate happens within the community, where they, at least when living in a multi-religious society, I think insistence on things like othering, non-believers as kafirs, or like holding out the thread of beheading because a perceived insult to someone who you considered as prophet, which might not be necessarily the case with 800 million others who might have other views about it, right? So I think there should be hopefully there should be some churn within the Muslim community, and they introspect, and when I think that's my sense, Roshan.
Yeah. No, I think just a few points to add to whatever you guys said. See, the law and order problem happens after the fact, right?
Correct,
There is
correct,
plenty of dog whistling, on social media even before, and
correct,
I think it points to a more fundamental problem. Like Prasanna, you said, right? This definitely is not without precedence, right? I mean, we can
correct.
go back to 1929 when
Rajpal.
Ilmuddin assassinated Rajpal, exactly,
Hmm,
Mahasha
hmm,
Rajpal,
hmm.
right? For publishing Rangila Rasool, which was supposedly derogatory against the Prophet. And it's important to note that Muhammad Ali Jinnah himself defended the accused there, right?
Correct.
It's another thing that he was executed for the crime, but this is not without precedence, and this points to a more fundamental sort of a flaw, and it's something that in society, I think, we have to address it. I mean, we in startups or software, you talk about technology debt, right? And I think there's a social debt also. If you don't
Correct.
address that social debt sooner than later, then you're going to see more such flare ups, especially in
Hmm.
the world of social media where we're living, right? Where these
Hmm.
are not limited to living rooms or mohallas or chai shops, right? I mean, I can post something, in the corner of my house, which will probably be amplified 10,000 fold now, thanks to social media,
Hmm.
right? So I think as society, we really have to address the more fundamental point. And all credit to, I think, Sri Rajiv Malhotra, right? He mentioned this way back when, I think, 20-25 years back itself. He is probably the guy who's been saying this forever, that, hey, I mean, we should move beyond tolerance to mutual respect, right? And that involves people coming together on different fronts, right? Whether it's
Correct.
theology, whether it is like leaders of different faiths and so on, and resolving this, because I think this requires resolution, definitely
Absolutely.
requires resolution. Otherwise, you're going to see more of this. And in terms of what the state can do, I think we have sufficient technology right now to triangulate on things like this, and catch some of these things before it happens. In
Correct.
fact, I mean, in the US, not even in China. I mean, in the US, this happens pretty routinely, right? I mean, people get rounded up all the time, and I
No,
think
but the
it's
sheer scale of numbers, right? Like,
mm,
and one is like you can when the radicalization is quite widespread, right? Like, I mean, not lone wolf operators, like in this case also. Let me sorry for the interjection. I just want to point out one
yeah,
fact is that a neighbor is the one who kind of snitched on Kanhaiya Lal and passed on information about this post to a larger WhatsApp group, right? Like in that kind of a
mm,
situation, I pointed out the things that the police did wrong, but like say even if you build a million workforce and
yeah.
a police force, like hire like million more police force and all that, when you're up against it, I think uh, policing
No, it's hard.
uh,
Yeah.
inadequate, right?
No, no, it's in individual. I think in any case, I mean, state capacity is famously, like,
It'll always be
low,
finite,
right?
right,
And
relative to
in
the problems in the society,
exactly,
unless you're
exactly.
living in
No,
a
it's a complex
Scandinavian
problem
country.
for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, it's a very complex problem, and I think, to the degree that we can catch the last mile, I think we have to be reasonable on that front, right? Which
Correct.
is why I think, we have to look at prevention rather than addressing
Absolutely.
these things after the fact, for sure.
As a principle,
Yeah,
prevention always works actually. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Actually, I think like the Indian state has kind of built some capacity over the years for preventing stuff like, say, a large scale bombing in an urban area and all that. I think that intelligence gathering and prevention is more
yeah,
geared towards that. But I think these kind of, you would say localized communal flare-ups, escalations, and that too, it's not like uh, people. These are like, say, in a typical large-scale riots, right? Like attacks happen on people that you have never met or seen before, or something like that. The anonymity of the mob gives that sense of
yeah,
impunity. But in this, it's like, there's a individual, and then there is a neighbor, and then there is a WhatsApp group and all that stuff. So, and
yeah.
I don't think so WhatsApp has done anything more than limiting the forwards to more than five people, which it thinks is a good way of controlling information flow. But
Yeah.
that's what.
No, it's hard. I don't think even they can do pretty, much
I
against
know.
this, right? Whatever algorithms you run. Um, yeah, but the point is, I mean, these mobs can gather anywhere, right? I mean, we've seen mobs in Bangalore, for example, right? It has
Correct.
happened earlier, and I've personally experienced this as well, and it's a pretty scary
Mm.
situation. And I feel for the police also, in these kind of situations where they kind of have to deal with this in a sensitive manner. They can't really go all out and quell any of these folks, right? So, Well, okay, let's hope that saner minds prevail on this. But in related news, the Supreme Court admonished Nupur Sharma last week. The Supreme Court on Friday came down heavily on suspended BJP spokesperson Ms. Nupur Sharma, saying that she has, again, to quote, a loose tongue and is single-handedly responsible for what is happening in the country. Justice Suryakant told Ms. Sharma's counsel that no, Mr. Singh, when the conscience of the court is not satisfied, we must mold the law accordingly. Um, in another forum, Chief Justice of India, Mr. N.V. Ramana, on Saturday warned that a non inclusive approach is an invitation to disaster and that people should rise above divisive issues to remain focused on human development instead. Well, Prasanna, I mean, some of these statements are
Yeah.
egregious even by Supreme Court judges' standards, right?
Yeah,
And I
even I
mean,
think like they have this tendency to make these oral remarks, but even by that standards,
yeah,
simply outrageous. See, but I think like of course, they've been rightly condemned and all that, but just to take a slightly macro view, Roshan, about like this, I think boils down to that constant, jostling between the executive and the judiciary, right? And see, I think what has happened, according to me, this is just a performative exhibitionism, I would call it, by the judges to play to the secular galleries, actually. So it's just like, see, I think last few months, right, even very reasonable rulings by the Supreme Court. Let's say, for example, the Maharashtra political drama, right, which kind of culminated where Supreme Court refused to, stay the this one, the vote of confidence, the floor test that was ordered, right? It is rooted in a very long legal precedents. So it was pretty straightforward that the Supreme Court would be saying, and in fact, I think everybody in the hearts of heart, even the people who are hoping against hope, they also knew that this is what is going to be the outcome in the Supreme Court. But even that criticism was, I mean, even that ruling was subject to so much hit job and smear job. And see, ultimately, I think the judges also, want to kind of, they lose no opportunity to demonstrate that, they are not under the control of the so-called executive, right? I think so. To that extent, I think so many series of articles, just not in India, even in the US, where I mean, which is bit of a joke, because in the US the president has the power to actually appoint ideologically aligned judges, right? Like,
yeah,
which is something like, at least in India, theoretically there is some give and take between the judiciary and executive in the appointment, though ultimately we still have the collegium system where Supreme Court alone has the ability to appoint its own judges, though like uh, the government can tacitly put some brakes on it, but ultimately, if the Chief Justice asserts that this judge has to be appointed, he has to be appointed, actually. So this is like a very unique system in India. So the entire uh, it's a complex issue. I hope that like they themselves, and one of these judges, that Pasi judge from Gujarat, right? He actually in 2015 made, unlike an oral remarks now, I think you can't typically be impeached against a oral remarks. It would be difficult to bring it up rather than only public criticism. But I think in 2015, in a Gujarat judgment, he actually went on record raving and ranting about the reservation system being detrimental to India's, progress or something like that. Actually, which is like a red line across political parties. So immediately there was a threat of impeachment and all that, and he immediately backtracked. Actually, okay, so it's like, I mean, some interesting observation and all that stuff. And I think from a government side, right, like. See, this process of even putting reasonable judges, or competent judges, or like judges who are broadly aligned with your worldview or something, is like a project that is like a multi-decadal project, right? Like, and the impact would always come with a significant lag effect, right? Like, so if you look at, you know the preponderance of quote unquote the secular liberal judges, right, in the system. It is because they get appointed in the lower levels of judiciary, say 30 years back, and then they kind of rise through the ranks. And today, that impact is there actually. So, like unless and I think like this regime recognized that, and that's why they passed the NAJC as one of their first agendas, right? But again, it was struck down by the Supreme Court. And later, I think the government probably thought that instead of like say a judicial appointment and large scale reforms of the judiciary, it would be better if a lot of things are not done. Say, let me put it, I don't know, like I have to be very careful in what I say. It has to be done in a much more subtle way, let me put it that way, right? Actually, so like you say, see, when Mr. T.S. Thakur was the Supreme Court judge, he was so hostile till the last day, actually. And then even Misra and later Gogoi were all supposed to be a very, very hostile judge. And they all started off that way, right? Even Mr. Gogoi was part of that uh, group of judges who are supposed to be rebelling against the government, right? And then finally, what happened and how he, I think, on what note he signed off from the Supreme Court, and the kind of narrative that is existing against him in the last 2 years. So, I think like uh, engagements between institutions like executive and judiciary, I think, are not like something that are done on, say, social media or Twitter, right? It's these kind of discussions and give and take and all happens in a very matured way, away from the arc lights actually. But I think like social media nuance is not necessarily the greatest strength of social media, but overall, I think the judges should refrain from, and this was actually even granting that they have the tendency to virtue signal and do all this kind of stuff in oral remarks. But I think this was like extraordinarily egregious, like what you pointed out, even by the usually
Yeah.
dismal standards that we hold them. And also now with so many websites and televisions also focusing on the on the judicial proceedings. And I also see a lot of videos emerging out of how judges conduct themselves in, I saw one judge flinging a file and all that stuff, which might have been par for course, but all this was never what do you call, highlighted in the public discourse, right? It's starting to happen now with so much commentary, focus, and all that. And so I think like for their own reputation and for their own good, judges should refrain from giving running commentary. And if they want to do that, and then it can be an in-camera kind of proceedings, so that they made it in an open court. This kind of a remarks either means it was a grandstanding, clearly meant for a certain consumption of a certain audience, right? But I hope better sense prevails with the. All institutions are under scrutiny, so I hope they put their best behavior forward. And I don't know whether they can withdraw the remarks or apologize, because I think that will be like seen as a personal embarrassment to them. And also, again, they will again actually, the entire idea was to please the the quote unquote the secular liberal commentariat. Now, if they kind of backtrack from it, they are going to end up displeasing them. So I think it'll best thing is to stay quiet for some time. And in often all institutions, one good thing that works for them is generally public memory and attention is very short, and a new issue comes and everybody moves to it. So that's
Yeah.
how things roll. So that's my sense on this actually.
Yeah, let me just repeat that statement again, right? So he says, no, Mr. Singh, when the conscience of the court is not satisfied, we must mold the law accordingly. You know, it's like they're a law unto themselves, right? I think the late Arun Jaitley put it very well when he said the tyranny of the unelected. Really,
See, and also I think this culture has got embedded in the judiciary, right? Like where uh, the expansiveness, like even the PIL, right? The public interest litigation was actually a quote unquote a judicial innovation, which kind of strictly not a job of the Supreme Court, actually, and this is like a judicial overreach has been a defining feature of the way in which the judiciary is operated in 2 3 months. Like, see, I think the conservative judges, if you look at in US, right, like they don't allow the expansion of quote unquote the constitution, right? Like they want to keep it as a very minimalist document, contrary to India, like where I think maybe the scale and the scope of what the constitution originally envisaged is probably double or triple now in terms of stuff. So, I mean, I think like this jostling for more power and encroachment of territory from other domains, actually, which is what is happening.
Yeah. No, I think, for like you pointed out multiple times, right? I think for its own sake, I think the Supreme Court has to kind of reform some of these things,
Correct.
right? With as much of a backlog, the kind of cases that they choose to focus on sometimes is just weird, right? I mean, and the commentary on very arcane things as well.
Hmm.
Um, but in I think in this case, I mean, thankfully, I think the orders have to proceed on what is actually recorded, written and recorded, and not
Correct.
on oral
Correct.
commentary, right? And I mean, it was, to be honest, I mean, I feel like it was a reasonable case to file as well, saying that, hey, I mean, I have cases
No,
filed in
of
20
course.
states,
Of
right?
course,
I
of
mean,
course.
can you just consolidate this into one place, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in
uh,
fact,
so I
I
don't
think,
think there was any high-handedness, as they have mentioned.
see, and I
uh,
think Mumbai police and Kolkata police were showing undue zeal in pursuing it, and in fact, uh, Mamta in her characteristic rhetoric even said that we'll take care of Nupur and all that, So basically, like you say, whatever she meant by we will take care of, and I mean, it was very clear that when her entire she's getting life threats, rape threats, and where she's just demonized by the community. I think that was the shocker, right? Like where you know. Uh, I mean, let's set aside the aesthetics of Nupur's comment, which I also essentially agree that as a spokesperson of a national party, right? Like you ought to be a little more circumspect and all that. And it's not a job of a political party spokesperson, even in a emotional anguish. It was actually in response to that, but still, like the implications are much more, right? Like say any of us saying it versus a national spokesperson, that's a
no,
different issue.
it's a political remark,
Yeah, it's a
basically.
political remark. So compared to that, the kind of, I mean, what was there was another word that they used, right? Like foul mouth, evil,
Loose
something
tongue
like
or
that.
something like that.
Yeah, I mean, which is like almost. I mean, I don't know. Like, if Nupur were from the other side of the divide, I think the Supreme Court would have been like reprimanded for being what do you call misogynist also. But I mean, it's okay if those kind of things are stated about that evil mouth, loose tongued women. Which is almost like a
Yeah,
very serious stereotype here. So, I
yeah,
mean, yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, I don't want to add another angle to it, but I'm just saying that it's pretty. I think it's a dark day,
Yeah,
But I think they were clever enough not to put it on the final return order. That is also you have to say, actually.
yeah. Couple of comments on YouTube. Mrinal Pandey says judges in the given case have a history of making regressive remarks.
Yeah,
And Nikhil says it was a direct quote from the hadith that she covered.
correct, correct. No, see, I think like
Right.
that's besides the point, according to me, and that uh, see, there's a fundamentally different world of seeing, right? Like the faith that majority of people in India follow, but perfectly fine in critiquing our own God. So for us, it's very tough to kind of reconcile when somebody can get so agitated about, like, I mean, across India, there are very strong traditions where you finally accept the God after critiquing him, questioning him, I mean, even mocking him. I mean, all these are perfectly fine within our faith, right? Like, I mean, and ultimately, the bhakti. But people know, so like even if you tell that you're quoting from their own books, I mean, it doesn't cut
No, I
eyes.
think yeah. So I think the primary distinction is between a personal remark and a political remark, right?
Political, right?
And I think she
That
also kind of
is that is
recognizes
critical.
that.
I mean, and a lot of times we don't say things essentially out
Obviously,
of.
yeah,
I mean, I would not say tolerance or thing. I mean, maybe aesthetics, decency. I would come down to that actually. Like I mean,
yeah,
that's
and the
that's what I would
consequence
say.
of it, right? Larger
Another
consequence also.
another another thing I would just point out about this whole incident. In India, the tradition has been that whenever something communally charged happens, it is tried that we hush it up, right?
Correct, correct,
We don't give it oxygen.
correct,
This is a unique case where like people were bringing oxygen cylinders to spread the fire, right?
correct, correct.
Why was that? Like, just think about it. Like, let's for the moment assume or accept or acknowledge that what she said was wrong. Let's say that, yeah, like, right? But the fact that people spread it in such a way with complete disregard to her personal safety,
Correct.
because you cannot say that you did not know what is going to follow.
Yeah,
Everyone knew that. If you did not spread that, if people did not spread it any more than a normal news debate flare up which happens 365 days in a year, the thing would have died down in a couple of days, right?
Correct, correct.
So
Absolutely.
I mean, to me, that was the most shocking thing apart
No,
from
actually,
the
Abhijay,
judges. Yeah.
it's not very shocking in the sense. I think like they've almost. I mean, in the sense that electorally winning an argument, I think they've kind of given up, or like even people of India. So I think the battle is now going to be taken increasingly internationalizing all this. Like, I mean, like you said, like our own tendency would be, see, we would not condemn something which is going to said or done abroad, right? Most Indians would, or Indian government also, I've seen across governments, we don't really interfere or make comments
No,
on.
no, I am like, this internationalization happened also on, let's say, the farm laws issue or CA.
I mean,
Like,
it's
I
been
can
happening
still get
like
that.
last
That's
1 year.
fine. Like, that's okay. That's still a policy debate. Like,
Hmm.
this one was purely to target the life of a particular
Person, correct,
person, and
correct,
like, you're basically giving up your own humanity because you want now that this person to be killed, right? It's as simple as that. So the fact that people went ahead without any shame or concern is quite staggering, really.
correct, correct. See, I think ultimately, as I just, I mean, not to blabber on this point. Ultimately, it's going to boil down to two things. One, either like I mean, a significant section of the Muslim community is willing to give up this idea of the slogans. I don't want to dignify the slogans by quoting where you saw the millions on the street doing that. Ultimately, the blasphemy thing has no place in any multi-religious democratic society. Either that, or maybe like, which is what the seculars are hoping. Like, I'll call a reasonable number of Hindus also. I think I've heard them saying is that you kind of you are living with 200 million of them. It's a society where you should coexist with them. So you are the demi position, as it's called, right? Like, actually, I don't see any other middle way. Like, either one has to uh, uh, happen. I mean, the rest are all theoretical options. Yeah, like say authoritarian, strong state with surveillance capability. Policing madrasa. I mean, you have like 10 million madrasas and like thousands springing up every day. How do you have the capacity to monitor what is being taught there? I mean, or say like outlawing madrasas or like that and all. I mean, and that's not at least a short to medium term option for sure, right? Actually, so either there has to be a reconciliation, either one of these two ways. Actually, that's what I see, and let's see how this unfolds.
yeah. No, just a couple of points to add on that. I think what is really unsettling is the sort of eventuality or the finality that's kind of building up to this, right? You did
Hmm.
this because, and hence, something else will happen, right? I think that is really unsettling. And also, I think people should kind of not lose faith in the state. And at least to that effect, I mean, I hope that something positive happens in terms of corrections. um, well, moving on. As I said, it's been a very, very eventful week, and in Maharashtra, power has changed hands after a week-long drama. On Friday, Mr. Eknath Shinde took the oath as Chief Minister of Maharashtra, with Mr. Devendra Fadnavis being declared the Deputy Chief Minister. Former Chief Minister Uddhav Thackeray was forced to resign after Mr. Shinde took 40 MLAs and defected from the Shiv Sena. This rebel group will now emerge as the real or original Shiv Sena, functioning in the footsteps of its founder, Balasaheb Thackeray. Mr. Shinde said the BJP with 106 MLAs and independence has a support of 120 MLAs, and added that if the party wished, it could have kept the CM post for itself. Uh, well, I mean, I think it was an unnatural alliance to begin with the Shiv Sena and NCP, and it was bound to break at some point of time. But I don't think anybody could have predicted the manner in which all of this unfolded over the last, week to 10 days. Right, Abhishek?
Abhishek?
Yeah. So we were discussing a little bit of it right last week. I think the logical conclusion we, at least I was thinking, was initially that Mr. Fadnavis would become the chief minister. I think then I think was it Thursday when the things moved quite swiftly, right? Where firstly it was declared that Mr. Shinde will be the CM, and at that time, Mr. Fadnavis said that he would be sitting out of the government, right? And later, I think after directives from the BJP central leadership, he agreed to join the government as the deputy CM. So I think that is the point where a lot of intrigue and debate is happening right now, right? In terms of what does it mean for Mr. Fadnavis's position in the BJP? In what light is he seen? Is this like a demotion or being cut to size, or is this really some, or is this not such a big deal, right? So I really don't know what to make out of it as of now. Curious what Prasanna feels about this incident.
I mean, I was kind of, not very, I mean, I was not certain that Fadnavis would be a natural, would be I mean, see, the social media, I think, like, the kind of, debate that happens very different from how real politic rolls, right? Actually, and I think obviously the person who's taken the maximum risks in politics, they tend to get rewarded the most, right? And so here it was Shinde who uh, took the risk, and I think it was pretty evident that he would be the choice of the CM. And also I think my sense, okay, I have nothing to corroborate, I'm just as a amateur political watcher. My sense is that this entire political operation was possibly orchestrated by Shinde and directly done and executed by the central BJP, actually, with the Maharashtra unit having probably little to marginal role. Maybe their role would have been confined to mobilizing those independents and smaller parties. But I think that entire discussion with Eknath Shinde and all would have been directly conducted between Shinde and the Delhi BJP. Yes, that's my sense. I mean, the entire way in which the operation was conducted, like say, first in Surat, then they go to Guwahati and all that. I mean, and we also saw that botched up operation in 2019, that short lived arrangement with Sharad Pawar, which kind of imploded spectacularly within a week, right? And I think like my sense is that that particular uh, operation, right, where they tried to tie up in a very clumsy manner, and the government just collapsed within a week. I think that didn't kind of have the complete buy-in of the central leadership. My reading of it actually. So probably this time they wanted to be very sure that any of those fiascos don't happen. So this had a much more. If you look at the outcome, right, it was a very, I mean, criticism apart, the clinical nature of this entire political operation where 39 people shift allegiance, and the way in which the judicial challenge was mounted, and the entire operation was like, I'm not prizing a political coup, but I'm just making a, I mean, it's just a neutral observation in the sense that it was a flawless operation, right? So I would think that it takes a far superior political mind and organizing for this kind of a project to have been executed. So to that extent, I would say that, it might have to happen with people who kind of have deep thing. But personally, I was not surprised. Okay, that Shinde was becoming the CM. The deputy CM part, I think that was a bit of a surprise. I wouldn't. I also thought that maybe Fadnavis would stay out of the government. But I think like what the BJP would have thought is that that kind of one takes away a bit of legitimacy from the government. Two is that like you also create a kind of an uh, quote unquote parallel authority within the governance structure, right? Like and typically it doesn't happen in BJP where they kind of encourage outsized roles actually. I mean, like people to punch above their weight or whatever. So I think from a legitimacy and also, of course, the competence that somebody like Fadnavis would bring to the governance, which I think is the only thing which works for him in a state where I think like it's a very socially difficult state for somebody like Fadnavis to ever crack, right? And I think the only limited goodwill that he enjoys is largely because of his perceived governance capabilities. So that will also stand the government in good stead. And I think like the previous term of the government, they've initiated so many projects that like it would have been a travesty if uh, like say BJP would not have been in the government to take the benefit out of it. I think in the next 2 years, I think like it'll be like a big slew of infrastructure projects that can be potentially inaugurated and showcased and all that. So Fadnavis's experience would be invaluable in some of this, right? Unlocking some of the projects which are already, either been delayed or deliberately sabotaged by the previous regime. We've already seen some action on that front. Uh, I think it's a politically smart decision, except for the fact that I don't know, like, was it the part where Fadnavis initially stayed? He's going to said he's going to stay out of the government, and then he was asked to join. I think that left a bit that part. I don't know how that entire thing unfolded. Maybe he was genuinely disappointed, actually, Fadnavis, and then that's why he said that he's not doing it. Or maybe it was probably a afterthought from the BJP Central High Command that he joining. But I would think the second is very unlikely because all these moves are so clinically planned that they would have thought through what's the role for Fadnavis in the government. So I would think it's more his personal disappointment actually. But I think effectively reduced Uddhav Thackeray to a metropolitan, as somebody said. I think Venu said, from basically Orly and surrounding areas is where I think the scenic. So, I mean, even otherwise, Senna had always challenged in geographic expansion, right? Actually, in Maharashtra. So it had considerable presence in Greater Mumbai, Thane region, Konkan, some presence in Marathwada, hardly present in North Maharashtra, not even a player in Vidarbh, actually. So, it's already a sub regional or two region party, right? Like all parties have this structural problem in Maharashtra. That's why you have this four players, right? Like because it's almost like a five different elections happen in Maharashtra whenever there is a state assembly election. So that there is no pan Maharashtrian party after NCP split. Congress is not, and Congress is just shrunk in most parts of Mumbai. Okay, so and I would be very surprised, like right now, maybe there is this unnatural constituency that is propping up Uddhav Thackeray, where they are trying to build him up into a larger than life and all that. But I neither see him as a person with that kind of energy or a detail orientation to stay the course and steer Shiv Sena to some greater heights and all that. Maybe Congress and NCP will have some utility for him in undercutting the strong, let me quote, the Hindu vote bank in the greater Mumbai region, which is currently shared between BJP and Shiv Sena. So, right, like if you have a breakaway faction, you prop up Thackeray as a very influential figure, maybe like that 60 to 65%. I think if Shiv Sena and BJP natural voters come together, right? I think in that 120 seats in Mumbai, Thane, Kalyan, it's almost like they will be 55 to 60% voters. You could just see the margins with Sainiks and BJP guys win in these regions. Actually, there's not even a fight. If you look at the Lok Sabha election in Mumbai, right, and of course Thane and Kalyan are very strong strongholds of Sena actually. So I think that might be his utility where they will prop him up disproportionate to his actual ground strength for some time if they see some value. But from a once he loses power, right, then a lot of things can change dramatically. I mean, and he's already lost power. So BMC elections would be significant, and uh, let's see how Sena, the official faction of the Sena, performs. Actually, that will be the critical part to. Anyway, they are shrunk. They are reduced to a kind of a metropolitan force propped up by South Mumbai liberals and the Oak crowd. And maybe some, surprisingly, they've drawn a lot of minority support. So I would not be surprised if Sena wins in some pockets of Mumbai dominated by minority population. I mean, like you saw some of the videos, right? Like I think like the Sainik support base seems to have dramatically changed. So I think like I would say BJP is in the is set to be the primary pole of Maharashtra politics actually, at least in the next 3 years. And see, BJP can play it like how a lot of people like they can play the long time game, right? Like they can wait 5 years, 10 years, and all. I mean, it's not that it's a fly by night party, right? Like they can sit through and do that. And certainly, I think they have good presence in Vidarbha, Marathwada, certainly in North Maharashtra. So Mumbai is where they had to, and Konkan is where they had to play second fiddle to Sena. Even that problem could be addressed now. So it's interesting, and I think that broadly the strategy comes where BJP thinks that like there is space for like one big Hindutva party there eventually. So I think like they'll move towards it. But I don't think so. They're going to try to destroy Shinde like what some people say. I think they will like how Congress NCP has a stake in building up Uddhav Thackeray as some kind of a force, even though he might be a spent force. The same interest BJP might also have to have a Shinde kind of a person in the helm of affairs. That's my sense of
Yeah.
this.
So we had almost an hour and 20-minute discussion on this yesterday with Rohit Jayaraman, who's our
Hmm.
resident political commentator and expert. And we saw through various facets of this, what is Shiv Sena's future, what is NCP's future, Congress and BJP and so on, and how this whole thing unfolded, what it means in the run-up to the 2024 elections and so on. Again, we're going to publish this episode on Tuesday next week. Do check it out. It was a very, very comprehensive discussion, and Rohit, in his inimitable style, delivered plenty of zingers on this. So, yeah, do check out that episode coming up next week. Well, in news on the economy front, the rupee has slid very close to a lifetime low against the dollar. Rising crude oil prices and unabated foreign capital outflows soured sentiment sentiment, leading to the value slip. A sell-off in equity markets and stronger greenback overseas also weighed in on the domestic unit. Meanwhile, the dollar index, which gauges the greenback's strength against a basket of six currencies, rose 0.2% to 103.43. That could actually be higher right now. But Abhishek, I mean, this was kind of expected, right? I mean, the dollar has appreciated 6%, I think, over the course of the year, and with all the central banks raising interest rates, to quell inflation. Yeah, do you see reason for alarm, and do you think that we'll cross the 80 mark?
Yeah, I think we'll definitely touch 80. Whether we persistently stay above that, I don't know. I mean, some analysts are saying maybe the next band could be the 80 to 82 kind of range where rupee might stay for a while. Uh, but yeah, as you said, right now, a lot of global factors are in play, right? So inflation is a huge concern in the United States. You had a pretty pathetic tweet by Joe Biden yesterday, I think, asking gas dealers to, reduce their profit margins to contain prices. But that's a big political headwind right there, right, in the US. And so the Fed has been increasing rates, and there is some expectation that they will continue to increase a bit more of the rates, right? And so, like, the US is facing both an inflationary problem as well as a potential recession, right? So it's a very difficult balancing game that they have to sort of play right now. But the trend is that the rates will continue to rise, right? And which means that FII money and all that will probably keep flowing out of India and other countries like that, right? And so that is one thing. Then you have the very high crude prices right now, partly due to the conflict in Ukraine, but also other things, right? So that is causing a lot of outflow. Uh, the good news for India is that our foreign exchange reserves are
Yeah.
still pretty healthy. Like we were around 600 billion plus at the start of June, I think. So the scenario is not too grim. I think it provides an opportunity for exporters to sort of do well in this scenario. We had a pretty good record breaking, in fact, year of exports last fiscal. So, yeah, I think challenging times in general, but the currency is not like the most concerning thing right now.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, the domestic investors, institutional investors have been pumping in a lot of cash as well, right? So that is a
As
promising
I
sign.
think one of our friends said, it is the SIP crowd which is keeping uh, our markets still in decent shape, right? So
Yeah. All right, to round things off with some sports news, Jasprit Bumrah, or Captain Jasprit Bumrah, I should say, was the star of the show on the second day of the fifth test. He picked off England's top order, helping India gain firm control of the test. England ended the second day on 84 for 5 with Stokes and Bairstow in the middle. Earlier, Ravindra Jadeja completed a well-deserved century, scoring 104 off 194 balls. The hosts were all out for 416 in the first innings. Bumrah smashed two sixes and four fours to amass 35 runs off of Stuart Broad and create a world record for scoring the most runs in an over in Test cricket. Um, well, I don't know where to begin actually. I don't know if we should begin with Rishabh Pant's fantastic 146, or we should talk about Ravindra Jadeja's very steely century, or we should talk about Jasprit Bumrah's smashing 35 runs off of Stuart Broad, or all of the wickets. I mean, it's just fantastic cricket, really. I mean, it's been so engaging. Last couple of days. But yeah, I mean, Prasanna, what do you think about Captain Bumrah?
No, but I actually saw the last part of Rishabh Pant's innings. Quite interesting. Uh, I don't know. There's this serious dichotomy between Pant and tests and in the shorter versions of the game. Maybe he has to sort it out in his mind. I think his shorter form performances have been disappointing, but I think like he's already the greatest Indian test wicket keeper by some distance. Just the centuries that he has scored in all sorts of conditions, and most of it uh, uh, rescue act, right? Like when the top, and especially last 2 3 years are with the complete collapse of Kohli's form, right? India's top order has been extremely fragile and vulnerable. So I think a century, see, at least earlier, like say a Gilchrist, he could blitz because he was part of the Australian lineup, which was so world-beating
Yeah,
lineup, right, under the Ricky
invincible.
Ponting's leadership and all that. But this Pant's performance has been under a very what do you call fragile Indian top order, right? Like I mean, Pujara is almost past his prime, I would think, and Rahane has been like very patchy, and opening slot has not been settled for a long time, and Kohli being there. So all credit to Pant, and I think like I don't know whether Bumrah is going to stake this claim for leading the Test team on a longer run, but really I think like very formidable bowler in these kind of conditions, right? And this, to be honest, this England team is not like the team of the 90s, or where like so many uh, Indian teams have not like comprehensively defeated, but at least from a batting standpoint, India has done very brilliantly in the 90s and 2000s in England. Sachin, Dravid, Ganguly, all have shown in, have done spectacularly well in English conditions. But this English team is like really good, right? Like just off from a 3-0
Yeah,
victory against England, and the brand of cricket that they play is nothing like what we traditionally associate English cricket with, right? Like squash buckling, like I mean, all out attacking cricket. And of course, I think they are the team to beat, and I think they're the best team in the shorter versions. I mean, I think there's no question about it. Just so much talent there. So this is not like any ordinary team, but I think what has kept India in the mix, I think, in the last 2 3 years in tests at least, right? I think like India has this problem where they seem to have emerged as a good test team, even as they struggle in the shorter versions of the game. I think like, and I think that is only attributable to the fact that we have a really world class fast bowling, or I mean, the pace attack, the pace and swing attack, which is I think like probably the best that India has had ever. So I think that kind of still helps them to contain the opponent despite never dominating with the batting. Actually, I mean, like maybe in a couple of Test matches which happened in India, they would have done well, but the batting has been a big struggle. So and this entire Indian pace bowling resurgence and making India such a tough cricketing nation to beat in overseas conditions, especially our performances in Senna has been like pretty fantastic. Everything boils down to our bowling. Actually, I think, and
yeah,
Bumrah has deserves all the credit for leading the pace battery of India and doing it so well and so consistently. I mean, I thought his initial performances were flash in the pan, and also his action. People predicted that there will be a lot of challenges in terms of sustaining it, but I think he's really grown from strength to strength. I think like all credit to him.
yeah. No, it's been fantastic to watch,
Yeah,
right? And as you mentioned, I think the bowling is the key difference, right? The fact that we can get those three or four very quick top order batsmen out, I think has made all of the difference, right? I mean, has made even something like a 350, 400 a very very significant total, in fact, right?
correct.
Yeah, and I think yeah, sure. I mean, our top order for sure, has a lot of problems. We were five down for less than 100 runs, right before Pant and Jadeja kind of settled the scene with the 200 plus run partnership. Abhishek, what do you see happening in the fifth test?
Yeah, I think India is in a good position, but as Prasanna was saying, this English team is in a very good form, right? They won 3-0 versus New Zealand, and all three of them they chased 280 plus scores, I think. Right? Somewhere between 280 to 300 was the target in each of the matches in the fourth innings, and they won it pretty comprehensively. So yeah, I think it's important that we get a good first innings lead if possible. Stokes and Bairstow are still at the crease, right? And they will probably play attacking cricket, right? That is how they have succeeded recently, and they'll continue to play that. So it's up to us, to get. I'm sure we'll create some chances as well, but again,
I
it's
think
about taking the catches and doing all the
correct.
basics right, right? Like Kohli dropped one yesterday night, but luckily, it was of Jack Leach, and he got out anyway in a couple of balls later. So I think our bowlers will create chances. It's up to our fielders now to probably take those sharp chances and keep the pressure on the English team.
Wonderful.
Yeah. All right. So that's the end of the Bharatvaarta weekly for today. Well, it was a very engaging weekly. As I mentioned, lots to discuss over the week. Thanks again for joining us. And if you have any comments, suggestions, please reach out to us on social media. We're at Bharatvaarta on all platforms. We have a couple of very interesting episodes coming up. As I mentioned, we have an episode with Rohit Jayaraman, who's our resident political expert. Talking about everything that's unfolded in Maharashtra. Super comprehensive, very insightful episode on that. We also have a kind of a state of the economy kind of a podcast coming up with Harsh Madhusudan, who you've heard again multiple times on the podcast on politics and economy and so on. So two very very good episodes coming up. Do check them out. All right, from Prasanna, Abhishek, and myself, thanks again for joining. Stay safe, take care, and have a wonderful week ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Bharatvaarta podcast. If you want to see more content like this, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We started Bharatvaarta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you wish to offer us feedback, do reach out to us on social media. We are at Bharatvaarta on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You could also get in touch with us on our website, www.bharatvaarta.in. The links are in the description below. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.